our first speaker, Dr. Patricia McConnell. Dr. McConnell is a well-known ethologist, certified applied animal behaviorist, and prolific author with over 25 years of experience applying the science of animal behavior to everyday life. She is the author of numerous books on training and behavior, as well as the critically acclaimed books The Other End of the Leash, which has been translated into 14 languages, and For the Love of a Dog, Understanding Emotion in You and Your Best Friend. Many people follow her on her blog, her weekly blog, called The Other End of the Leash. I recommend that as well. She lives with her border collies, Willie and Maggie, as well as her Cavalier Tootsie, and a very spoiled flock of sheep. Patricia claims that she suffers from separation anxiety whenever she leaves them, so do keep that in mind. Our opening presentation is titled, I See What You're Saying, Translating Conflict-Related Visual Signals. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Patricia McConnell.
Hi. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. This is going to be really, really fun. I'm going to start with a story, a very quick one. I was in Nova Scotia a million years ago when I was young, and I had a St. Bernard who I got as a wedding present. I bought him instead of silver, which is what the money was supposed to be for, but you don't have to polish dogs, so I got a dog. So I'm in Nova Scotia, and someone with a very strong accent, which I can't possibly replicate, so I'll just talk funny, came up to the car where my 180-pound St. Bernard was and said, "Is he ugly?" I said, "What? I'm sorry, what? Is he ugly?" "I'm sorry, is he ugly?" "Well, I think he's sort of cute." "I don't think he's ugly." They meant, is he aggressive? Can I pet him? So that was a simple miscommunication. And I don't know about you, but on occasion in my life, I have had problems with communication with members of my own species. I don't know, anybody ever here, ever have any ever with your partner, your spouse, your mother, your child? I have problems communicating with myself. So communication can be quite a complex task. So what I want to talk about today is an aspect of communication, which we all know, communication is the glue that holds social relationships together, right? You can't really have social relationships unless you have some form of communication. So it's the glue that holds these relationships together. It's also the acetone that can separate them, create problems, and create conflict. And conflict is what I want to talk about today, because every social animal, whether it's a dog or a person, needs to resolve that there's an inherent conflict in a way, in that every individual wants to behave in a way to help themselves. You need to behave in a way that's to your best advantage. But if you're a social species, you're also needing to fit in. You're needing to modify your behavior in ways that creates harmony in the group. So there's always a kind of inherent conflict, if you will, when you are a social species. There are obvious sort of finer grained conflicts that arise all the time. Some of those can be resolved through visual signals. Some of them, on the other hand, we resolve with language. Language can be a great clarifier, but can also be a bit of a confuser. Dogs don't have verbal English-like human linguistic language skills, but that doesn't mean that they can't communicate with each other all the time. And our job, one of our jobs here for this conference, and our job every day at home, or with clients if you're a professional, is to try and translate the communication, a lot of the signals that are going on. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk specifically about conflict-related visual signals between members of a different species, and what we know about them and what we don't know about them. And for those of you, I heard a rumor that there are people in Australia, who got up at 1 a.m. to be able to live stream this, to be able to watch. So hello, Australia. And here's the good news. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, and then you can go to bed. Then you can go back to bed. Because I can really summarize what I have to say in a couple of sentences, which is, related to conflict-related signals, we know a little bit. We know, most importantly, many of the signals that are relevant. That doesn't sound like a big deal unless you think about it from a perspective of a scientist studying animal behavior. Imagine you're studying a species you know nothing about. You go out in the woods, you go out in the desert, you go to a new planet, and you see a species you've never seen before. And you're trying to understand them, and you're trying to understand their behavior. What do? How do you figure out who they are? You know, how do you learn about them? Well, you can study how they feed themselves, you can study their reproductive behavior, their social systems, and you can also look at how they communicate. But looking at how they communicate can actually be quite difficult, because if you don't know anything about the species, you don't know what movement or expression is actually a communication. If the species you're studying does this, is this an important signal? Does this mean something in their species? Or does it mean, you know, they're scratching of their neck? You know? So it sounds really simple, but it's actually quite complicated. And the good news is that we know a lot. We don't know all there is to know, but we know quite a bit about what signals in the domestic dog are relevant in terms of social communication. But what I'm going to talk about at length today is we don't know much about the other side of that. We know what signals are relevant, but we're not always sure what the message of those signals are, and we're not sure what the meaning of those signals are. Wonderful ethologist named W. John Smith is one of my idols. Talks about the message and the meaning. The message is the information being conveyed by the sender, by the animal doing something that conveys information. The message is the information that the receiver gets, which isn't always the same. Because the receiver is getting all this extra information about the environment, the context, etc. And so matching the meaning or the message and the meaning isn't always so easy. So that's the part that we haven't done so well on yet, but that's the part that makes me so excited about this conference, because that's a lot of what the scientists who are going to be speaking for the rest of the conference are going to be talking about. You know, I was trained as a scientist. I have a PhD in zoology. I specialize in ethology. I'm not a scientist now. I'm a behaviorist. I'm a trainer. I'm a writer. This lady who loves dogs and usually people most of the time. And my job is to help translate the brilliant science that's going on right now. So I'm really excited to be here to support all this great research that's going on. I can't wait for the rest of the day. So let's focus on conflict-related signals. Whoops. And there's a name for that. Ethologists, behavioral ecologists talk about agonistic signals. That's actually from a Greek word meaning contest. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about signals that sometimes people equate agonistic behavior with aggression. That's only one very small part of it. Agonistic signals are designed to resolve conflicts, and even more importantly, to prevent conflicts. That's their job. When individuals have flexible or plastic behavior, they have the ability to vary how they're going to respond, vary what they're going to do based on the information they're getting. And so agonistic signals are all about being in a social system in which it's to your advantage to prevent conflicts. And once they come up, you need to find a way to resolve them, and you need to find a way that isn't too destructive. You know, dogs have carpet knives in their mouth, basically. Anybody who has a young puppy or a young dog, I have a new border collie who basically is a beaver. She can pretty much chew through anything, and she's learning really well. She's doing great. She's learning what to chew on and what not to chew on. But I couldn't rip up a leather purse with my teeth. I'm happy to say she hasn't either yet, but I know there's that possibility. Dogs have the ability to brutally hurt themselves. Regrettably, we share that ability. We have nuclear weapons, we have military drones, right? We have the same ability. That's why conflict resolution is so important in social species, especially ones that basically have weapons. Let me continue. by just playing a little video that illustrates a couple of important points related to communication. This is actually from an ad that makes me want to buy a leather jacket. Or look like her.
Here we are,
pretty much.
together all alone, in the still of the night, and baby, all I know, my poor heart skips a beat when you're next to me, in the still of the night. Well, here we are, just you and me like this, with every sweet
Keep watching.
caress, and with every tender kiss.
Did you get the last look? Right? The last look, right? The double take? How long did that take? How big was that movement? It was tiny, right? It was absolutely tiny. So there are a lot of lessons in this great ad. One, I wish I looked like her. I would tell you that just last night some man dropped his key off beside my dinner table, but that actually didn't happen. But there are a couple of messages from that. One, you don't have to use language to communicate. We all know that. Two, if a signal is relevant, it can be very subtle. It can be very subtle. I'm always amused at the advice that I've heard from sort of old-fashioned traditional obedience trainers where when you're going to have your dog lie down, you need to make a really strong visual signal. So the signal is, lie down, right? I don't know if you can see me right now. Lie down, I'm throwing my hair. Right, and so if you're half a mile away, that might be important. But you know, if you're 20 feet away, you can just like nod your head. Like, that was a huge signal to a dog, right? Lie down. Because we all know dogs have inadvertently learned to do all kinds of things to our inadvertent signals, right? So signals can be very, very subtle. But they can also be confusing. There can be a disconnect between the message and the meaning. So let's ethologically analyze that woman's behavior. What was she communicating to him by her actions? What was she doing? What was she doing? Was she saying she was available, or was she saying she was not available? Well, based on all good ethology, she was saying, I am very available to you. She was doing two things that science, that some of you raised your hand, that psychologists have found through some really nice research, is that the way women signal availability there are a couple of things, and one is the touching of the hair, right? Which she did several times. And the other is the sidelong glance with just a tiny little bit of, keeping your eye on, just look and then look away. So if you put those together, it's sort of like tail flagging. Maybe not quite. Maybe not quite. But it's saying, at least we can be in a conversation here. And so he picked up on that. Maybe, there should have been a little bit more courtship behavior before he dropped the key off. But she was communicating a very strong message, and he took a different meaning from it and acted on it. So the importance of understanding the difference between message and meaning, and getting clarity about what's being communicated. There is a great advantage in being a human. I'll let you read that for a minute. One of my favorite slides of all time. Absolute favorite. So here are a couple things. One, we're all pretty sure Buddy wasn't watching Old Yeller, right? We're pretty sure he wasn't, and we're pretty sure that if he was, he probably wasn't seeing what we're seeing, because dogs don't usually watch television like we do, because their flicker rate is different. But the reason this is so funny is because Buddy's posture And facial expression is so much like ours, right? It's so much like ours. This is not the expression of a dog about to eat his dinner, about to go on a walk when you take the leash down from the hook. This is not the expression of a dog who did just see a bitch tail flag, right? This is an expression that, if a human is making it, is somewhat surprised. Perhaps we might even anthropomorphically say appalled. And so the anthropomorphic word comes up, and I just parenthetically, before I go any further, I think it's important to say that our being anthropomorphic is both a blessing and a curse. And it's traditionally been considered to be a curse, and it often is in dog training, we all know, as Horowitz and Hecht have shown us in their beautiful research, the guilty look, as trainers have always known, was not necessarily, or is not, an expression of guilt. It's an appeasement behavior, or we'll talk about that language in a minute. So we can get a lot of trouble being anthropomorphic, but there is a flip side to that, which is that our ability, our very advanced cognitive ability to put ourselves in the place of others gives us a tremendous advantage. And we are probably correct in making a correlation between Buddy's facial expression and behavior with the way we might be feeling when we were doing that, because it's probably accurate, because there are a lot of universalities about expressions across all of the mammals. So again, anthropomorphism, blessing, and a curse. And it's important not to, as Prescott was reminding us so importantly, not to oversimplify these things. So let me talk a little bit, before I talk about canid signals specifically, let me talk a little bit about how ethologists, behavioral ecologists, about how scientists try and figure out what a particular behavior means. And you're going to see some just really exciting, I can't wait to see Dr. Gadbois' research, for example. I can't wait to see all the speakers today. But you're going to see some really good science looking at how do you try and sort these things out. But let me just start by giving you some examples from one of my favorite researches and from another species. And those of you who know me know that I'm always arguing, if you really want to understand dog behavior, then learn everything you can about animal behavior in general. Because the more you can put dogs in perspective, sort of put them in context, compare and contrast, the better you'll understand them, or you'll understand them in more depth, and I think with more nuance. And I think that's really important to get away from that black and white thinking. So this is one of my favorite studies. This was done by Robert Seafarth and Dorothy Cheney. They studied this adorable oxytocin-producing little Cercopithecine monkey named a vervet. They're squirrel-sized monkeys. They live in Africa. They are highly vocal. They have a very strong social system. They are both arboreal and terrestrial. And they have a very complex system of vocalizations, which Seafarth and Cheney have studied for over 20 years. They wrote a great popular book, by the way, called How Monkeys See the World. It's a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. It's been around a long time, but it's one of the greats. So here's what they did. They tape recorded the vocalizations. This is a mama and her infant. They tape recorded the vocalizations of vervets, while at the same time simultaneously recording their behavior before the vocalization, during the vocalization, and then after the vocalization. So they started with describing. Remember I was talking about what behavior is relevant? That's one of the ways they tried to figure out, well, what noises are relevant? You know, is the noise of a yawn, you know, when you yawn, you usually make a noise. Does that noise communicate something? Is there meaning in that? Is there a message there? What kind of noises mean something? And do the noises, are they distinguished? Are they discrete? And so indeed, after years and years and years of study, these are sonograms. Basically, this is pitch on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal one. So these are like short, rapidly repeated, sort of broadband notes like that. So what they found was, first of all, they give different vocalizations depending on the context. So if a leopard came towards the area where they were feeding on the ground, they gave this vocalization. There's a difference between males and females, by the way, which is very interesting and makes it even extra complicated. But we're going to focus just on the context-related differences. So if the leopards came up, leopards love vervets. They're an easy, quick little snack for them, like a little bowl of peanuts. And so if a leopard was seen in the area, the scout would vocalize with that vocalization. If an eagle was flying overhead, usually they'd spend a lot of their time up in trees, highly, highly vulnerable to predation by eagles. A tremendous amount of predatory birds in Africa. I'm sort of amazed at how dangerous the skies are there. And so specific vocalization for eagles and a specific vocalization for snakes. So that's the describing part I told you about. What is the relevant stimulus? What's important? That's really important. And that's a lot of where we are right now, or have been for the last couple of decades, in the field of looking at agonistic signals in dogs. We know some movements, facial expressions appear to be really, really important. The question is, what do they mean? What is the meaning and what is the message? The elegance of Seaforth and Cheney is that they did what we need to be doing in the best ways we possibly can, which is test what is the message of that. So they did that by doing playback studies. They took great high-quality recordings of vocalizations, recorded when, what context they were given, and recorded who gave them, so they could only play them back in an appropriate context where we'll just call her Martha. Martha could have been giving a call associated with the presence of an eagle, and they would play it back to Martha's group, but when they couldn't see Martha, or close to where Martha would actually be in space. So they were very, very careful to create the right context. And what they found was that the vervets responded to each call differently. If they heard a leopard call, they ran up into the trees and got in the branches too thin for the leopards to crawl up. If they heard a, quote, eagle call, then they ran down to the bottom of the bushes and hid from the eagles. If they heard a snake call, they came down the tree, mobbed the snake, basically, all clustered on the ground, stood on their hind legs bipedally, and basically screamed and mobbed the snake. They behaved very, very differently depending on each vocalization. But even more interesting to me is that there was a lot of learning involved, in that the young can produce, or physically able to produce these calls at a very, very young age, sub-juvenile. They're very good at producing the vocalizations, but not in context. They had to learn how to use them in context. So they would start giving a, quote, eagle call to anything flying over, whether it was a predatory bird or not. And because of that, the calls of the young were absolutely ignored by adults. So they might look up and go like, oh yeah, that was George. He doesn't know yet. And the youngs would also respond inappropriately. So by doing these playback studies, what they were able to distinguish was, these are the relevant signals, these are the important signals, and this is a little bit about the message and the meaning. Now, there's one caveat I should give, is that my major professor, Jeff Bayless, he made a very minor critique, you could call it, or we created a thoughtful discussion about the use of eagle, leopard, and snake call. Because just because there's an eagle in the air, is the vocalization, does it mean there's an eagle in the air? Or could it mean there's an aerial predator? Or could it mean I feel a certain way when I see that animal, and I'm more afraid of an eagle than I am a leopard? And so perhaps it changes based on a different emotional state. The latter does not appear to be the case at all. It appears to be very much context specific, object specific, which is really fun. So that's one way for us to look at what do these signals mean. Here's another way. This is from Eric Zeman, extremely well-respected European wolf ethologist, worked with wolves for decades. And don't worry about any of the text here. All I'm going to point out to you is, do you see how there are lines of different sizes? And what Zeman is looking at here is he's basically looking at who does what to whom, which is another way of analyzing behavior. And is that behavior symmetrical? And what he found was that in this case, he's just looking at fur sniffing. One individual walks up to another, it inserts its nose sort of deep into the fur, does a sort of relatively long inhalation, and it turns out it's not symmetrical. So this, for example, this is a middle social ranking male who does a lot of fur sniffing to the breeding female, but she does very little back to him. So you can see that line back is actually very, very thin. So that's another way we can look at trying to understand the meaning and the message. Here's another way, and this is one of those tedious, horrible slides you're never supposed to put up. And the reason I put it up is because it's a perfect example of the horrible tedium of doing an ethogram. For those of you who know, ethograms are basically exceedingly, tediously detailed description of a particular behavior. It's the first thing I was taught to do when I took courses in ethology at the University of Wisconsin. So our first job, my very first job, the first day of class, was to describe, they had laboratory rats sitting in big glass containers on each of the tables in the laboratory where we were working. And our job was to describe what they were doing. And so we had like 10, 15 minutes to do that. And so, okay, like what did you say? So somebody would, raise their hand and say, well, the black rat walked from the corner on the left over to the white rat in the corner on the right. And the professor said, walking? What is walking? Please describe walking. Well, we all know what walking is, right? Please describe it. Of course you do. We all do. So it's easy to describe, right? Well, they would put one foot in front of the other. Good. Which foot? So basically, what we got taught, and the ethologists here like nodding in pain, right, is a good ethological description is basically going to describe the movement of each paw, the alternating nature that they're not, they're alternating, they're not pacing, what paw goes before, what paw goes after, the speed at which they went, how long it took them to get from one corner to the other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're just soul-killingly tedious descriptions, basically. But they're really, really good for us. They're really, really good. And if you want to put on an ethological hat at home, the best thing you can possibly do is sit down and just start trying to describe what your dog is doing. Really clearly, really, really clearly, like it's a video, right? Like somebody's seeing it happen, like they have no idea what you mean when you say trotting or sniffing the other dog's butt. It's a great exercise. So, one of the ways to accurately describe behavior is to remember that a picture is worth, right, 1,000, 10,000 or words, right? A picture is worth many, many, many words. And so a lot of the really good ethological work on canids has some really good artistry in it, some really great descriptions. And that, by the way, was one of our second tasks, is we had to go buy our little field book and we had to go out in the field and we had to start drawing. Just start drawing. Just start drawing what you're seeing. Every artist knows there's no better way to really see something than to have to draw it, because it forces you to focus. We all know that you can look but not see, right? We all miss a ridiculous amount of input all the time. Thank heavens, because otherwise our brains would explode. So it's a good thing we do have these filters. But if you really want to get good, you need to be really, really good at focusing on, again, the relevant parts of the body and the relevant signals. So focus first, if you would, on these images. This is from Roger Abrantes' book, Dog Language, Encyclopedia of Canine Behavior. It has fantastic images in it. Really, really good, lovely descriptions of facial postures, movements, etc. And I think we all agree that the change in the commissure is an important and relevant agonistic signal. Again, something to either prevent conflict or resolve conflict is an important signal that's used often in social interaction between both wolves and dogs. We know it's really important. We're all pretty much agreed with that. There's no controversy. But then there's the meaning that we are taking from whatever message is being sent. And that's the great black hole of mush where we sort of are now, where we need all the scientists who you're going to be hearing continuing to work, continuing to send out brilliant graduate students to do more research, because the fact of the matter is we're a little mushy about how we're describing a lot of this behavior. This is from Abrantes' work. when a dog snarls with the lips drawn forward or curled, it shows self-confidence, superiority, and dominance. Self-confidence, superiority, and dominance. Those are three different things. Some people would say it doesn't show self-confidence because dogs don't even have self-awareness. I actually don't agree with that, but some people would say they can't be self-confident. Superiority, that's an interesting concept. Is that a concept dogs have, or is that a concept humans have? Dominance, ooh, the D word, woo, woo. I'm going to talk about that a lot on Sunday morning. And so when a dog snarls with its lips drawn back, it shows inferiority and submission. Complicated, confusing. Just one example of how confused sometimes we can be. We could also call this, we could say, yes, perhaps this dog here is confident, or we could say, on the other hand, the flip side, it's fearful or anxious, or perhaps just say, not confident. We could also say perhaps it's on offense or it's on defense. But what do we really know? We know that, again, those same visual signals that you see in wolves, you very often see in dogs. They seem to be, they've been passed on through the genetic baggage from wolf to dog, from canid to dog. So the change in commissures, sort of the famous C versus the V, we know is highly relevant. But again, we have a lot of questions about what it actually means. Another example is canine greeting behavior. We know that dogs have a very elaborate, ritualized greeting behavior in which what previously was called, this is a dog doing what was previously called passive submission. Passive submission down on the ground, belly up, perhaps throat exposed, active submission, licking the muzzle, et cetera, et cetera. So that's traditionally, this has been called a submissive posture. That was true for decades and decades. Submission is not a popular concept now, right? It's not okay to be submissive. There are a whole number of cultural reasons for that, but they are cultural. So it's not acceptable to talk about, at least now, it's not politically correct to talk about submissive behaviors when you're talking about dogs. So now it's more correct to talk about appeasement. But here's the deal. Appeasement was a really dirty word after World War II. Chamberlain was accused, right? The people whose hair is as gray as mine really actually is. They remember Chamberlain was accused of appeasing Nazi Germany and giving away part of Europe. Appeasement was a dirty, dirty word. So it's very ironic and interesting that we've sort of playing around with all these different words. I saw when I was doing some research on this topic, I found conciliation used a little bit. Never did I see anything, I'm sure it's there somewhere, but I didn't see anybody use it as a sign of respect. Another possible word we could associate with it. But we do certainly understand. This is a little girl curtsying to the queen. You know, we understand about bowing and curtsying. What do you want to call it? Submission, inferiority, respect, appeasement? I don't know. We need to sort our language out because it's a bit of a muddle. And here's a possible solution. While I was looking for something for all these different words, this is Roger Abrantes used this in one of his publications, and he used it with all seriousness, as best I can tell, high humbleness. A dog who was doing passive submission was described to be in a state of high humbleness. I'm using that. I'm sorry. High humbleness, it's perfect. I'm just saying that until we get more information later on today, we're going with high humbleness for a while. Did you just see it? You know, you're talking to somebody and you disagree, and you say, you know, with all high humbleness. What you said is just garbage, right? All right. But the fact is, whatever we call them, animals with social structures need these displays. You know, we talked about avoiding and preventing conflict. It's really important. Conflict can be injurious. It can also be very energy expensive. And that's one of the things, by the way, you learn by studying other animals, is we forget, living the lives that we do and the lives that many of our dogs live, we forget that a lot of what drives a lot of behavior is the limited resource of energy. Energy is a very limited resource. And so part of the function of an agonistic display is to save energy, is to get information passed on quickly. And we do that all the time. We can just do it in more elaborate We just have more flexibility about how we can do that. Somebody walked up on the stage right now with a gun. Wouldn't it make a really big difference to you if he had on or she had on a uniform and a badge, right? That's a display. Same thing with sports. What people do on a sporting field actually are felonies if they're not in a right? If they're not in an arena and they don't have on, well, actually, American football is just one long felony after another, but we will move on from that. So let's just watch a set of agonistic signals between these are two Hungarian Mastiffs who have a resource that they both want. So here's my question for you. What I want you to do is I want you to watch, and I want you to figure out, I'm going to play this again, so I want you to figure out what is the first movement that tells you what dog is going to win, what dog is going to get the food, okay? Nobody gets hurt, by the way, just in case you're having an adrenaline problem. Those of you who work with aggression, it's like, oh, please, no. They work it out. The worst of anthropomorphism in me wants to put a little thought bubble over the dog on the left. It's like, I'm just a country lawyer, and I don't know, just gonna slide on over here and don't mean anything by it. Just gonna hang out. There's that agonistic pucker on the dog on the right. Just happen to put my nose down where the food is. All right. Wait, what happened? Oh. So, what was the first movement? Playing it again here. See the dog's head move, right? Yes. The first movement that I can see doesn't mean the first movement that dogs can see, but the first one I saw was the dog in the foreground turn its head a tiny bit to the right. I'm going to do it again. This is not working, by the way. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. There. And watch what happens. Watch this forward, okay, right? That's called supplanting. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So we all worked it out. We all worked it out. This is a reminder to us. Again, remember I talked about how relevant signals can be really, really subtle, which means we've probably seen, we know some of them, but we're probably still missing a lot of them. Wonderful example is at Cointro's work on lateralization of tail wags. Have you been watching which way your dog's tail wags ever since then? Going like, oh no, it's going to the wrong side. He doesn't love me. But so, one of the things we know is that a very, very important signal in dog communication is what's often called supplanting, or moving forward and taking the space. Sometimes we call it looming. Here are two dogs. This is from What Is My Dog Saying? A wonderful set of CDs. Highly recommend it. So this dog is moving forward, looming. That is a dog expressing high humbleness. But you can see, I think I might need a new battery. This is dying? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. No, it doesn't matter what somebody needs to get me a new one of these really, really soon, or else we'll be on this slide for the next 25 minutes because it's not working anymore. So, so I won't tell a joke. Let's see, what will I do? Oh, something just happened. Deb might be saving me up there. There's a queen of PowerPoint up there. So you can see this sort of this line, this forward movement. And if we advance the slide one more, then you can see why dogs are often so reactive to typical primate greeting behavior and inappropriate canine greeting behavior, right? Again, so a signal doesn't have to be huge to be highly relevant. Next slide.
We're going to help you. We'll be back in a second.
Okay. So this is another example of the importance of supplanting. And this isn't usually considered to be an agonistic signal.
Is this dying?
But it's not working, so it's sick anyway. Would you actually pause that for a second, Deb? If you would be so kind. Oh, thank you. So I just want to set the scene up a little bit here. You're going to see 3 border collies getting sheep out of a corner. Talk about conflict. There's a lot of conflict in the ewes have young lambs. They're very protective of their lambs, and if they turn away from the dog, then often they sort of leave their lamb there. So they're hesitant to turn away, which they would normally do. They're also in a corner. Obvious problems for the dog makes it far more difficult. And so go ahead. So you can see 3 dogs. This is my Lassie when she was very, very young, and you'll see this black-faced ewe go after her. This is Beth Miller. This is her farm, and I'm tape recording, and Beth is protecting Lassie, which you need to do for a young dog. But what I want you to be focusing on is the dog's center of gravity. Thank you. It's the dog's center of gravity. This is another young dog, and the dog's head is down and the dog's tail is down, which is exactly what you want to be seeing, right? That's what you want to be seeing when you're watching a herding border collie. They should be in a, quote, stalking posture. So that's all good, but look at what are called intention movements. Scientists talk about intention movements as in, I'm moving in such a way that tells you what I am about to do next. And this dog is moving in such a way that tells you what he's about to do next is withdraw. And the sheep can read that. Nobody reads a dog better than sheep. The sheep are really, really good at reading that. This dog's chance of getting the sheep out of the corner without Beth's help is nil, is actually impossible. You have to help young dogs often sort of learn to win, but a lot of young dogs have a little bit more chutzpah than others. So Beth basically is moving the sheep out, supplanting, taking the space, and the dog, this is not a dog who ended up being a working sheep dog, because just a little scared. So you're going to see the opposite. You're going to see the master. You're going to see Justin. What I want you to watch again are his intention movements. Where do you think he's going to go next? At any one point in time, if we stopped it, what is he about to do next? What would you predict? And if you look at where is his weight distributed, it's forward. It's distributed forward. And it might have paused. Deb, you want it? There we go. I don't think it was paused. I call him the martial arts master. Because first of all, she tests him, nothing, right? So he responds by either standing still or going forward. He shows beautiful finesse. She's going to go after him again, and he lies down, but he does not back up in space. It's just gorgeous. And he's a martial arts master. He lets her energy bounce off of him and bounce back on her. It's really, really beautiful. Yep. Right? Deflecting the energy, right? This is what everybody wants in a great dog. So supplanting, looming, very, very important signal. So I just want to remember I talked about looking at other species. It's great to look at cats. I wish there were cat conferences. I really, really do. I love cats. I'm fascinated by their behavior. Cats are very similar in some ways to humans and to dogs, but they're also very, very different. Their social structure is extremely different than ours. They don't have the kind of greeting rituals that dogs do. And that means a lot of conflicts don't get prevented, which is why introducing cats is almost always harder than introducing dogs. So you're going to see the same kind of supplanting and use of space. You'll see some tongue flicking and lip licking, by the way. You see ear posture changes. You see the tail thrashing, paw raised. Tongue flick. But there's no tail up, tail down. There's no high humbleness. And it's going to end pretty much like we think it will. Here we go. So talk about fear. So one of the complications of agonistic displays that require extra good research is the fact that animals can be giving an agonistic display. They can also be expressing an internal emotional state, and those things often go together. But they're not necessarily the same. These photographs are examples of sort of the universal nature of facial expressions of fear, which are indeed universal to most mammals. This is a photograph from Paul Ekman's work. I always think of this as being Paul Ekman. I don't actually think it is, but he's the psychologist who did the brilliant, or maybe anthropologist, who did the brilliant work and found that facial expressions, the message and the meaning, are similar all across the world, no matter where you are, no matter the culture. They are indeed universal. That was believed not to be true, by the way. He was ridiculed for years. He was banned from speaking for making this argument, just to remind us of what Prescott was telling us about, is that science isn't about facts. It's about discovery, which is an ongoing process. So separating out displays and emotional states, I think, is something that we haven't thought about very much, and I'm just sort of starting to think about it. This is a dog doing an agonistic pucker. And this is a display I often see, and I'm seeing it a lot lately because my border collie Maggie is going into heat and she's going crazy flirting with Willie, my neutered male. And Willie is continually giving her this agonistic pucker with no change in the rest of his face. His face looks completely neutral. It's like, go away, and she does, and she flirts, and then she comes back, and then she flirts some more. He's like, very, very different than if you see the entire face engaged. This is a movie that's quite poor quality, so I apologize for this. This is a border collie named Mandy. It was a puppy I sold. I got her back because she was exhibiting aggression. One of the common contexts, by the way, this is Denise, who I'm begging to stare in her eyes. Denise does not normally do this, but I'm asking her trying to elicit this agonistic display, agonistic pucker and tooth display. What I hope you can see is that there's no change in the muscles between her eyes. There's no change in the tension in her face. And basically what I get from this was just a dog basically saying, go away. I mean, you can say like, go away, or you can say, go away, right? So you can communicate with emotions added into it or not. And this is just an example how this dog seemed to not care at all. It seemed to me that when she was telling people to go away from her car, she sort of almost had learned it and didn't really care whether they did or didn't. She actually wasn't an aggressive dog at all, I'm happy to say. But emotions are an important part of communication, and being able to predict an animal's future behavior is a very important part of social communication. And the fact that the expression of emotion are aspects of it that are universal is something we've known for a long time. Darwin, in the 1880s, 1872, wrote a book right after the descent of man called The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. He meant it to be a chapter in the descent of man because he was using this as another example of the continuity between other mammals and humans. It was sort of another piece of the puzzle, another argument to add on to the argument is that there's not the animal world and humans, that we are actually mammals and there actually is a connection. And so we know that there are indeed, as I said earlier, these universalities. And that's very, very helpful because it indeed does help us interpret the message of a dog's particular signal, although as we all know, we can also misinterpret it quite well. I go back to the guilty look, which so many dog owners see as a dog being guilty when actually it's a dog responding to some kind of harsh correction or the potential of from its owner. I want to talk about tongue flicks. I wish we could talk about sort of all the agonistic signals, but obviously we can't do that in the short period of time that we have. But I want to talk about tongue flicks because they illustrate a couple of the controversies that I think are important for us to sort out, again, related to message and meaning. Tongue flicks are seen in many, many species, including humans, including horses, certainly wolves and dogs, and there have been interpretations, attributions of many, many things to tongue flicks. One is low-level anxiety, and I've said that. My belief, and it's just a belief, but my belief is that dogs will tongue flick often when they're slightly anxious. You see it all the time in dogs at vet clinics. I see it all the time in dogs who have been trained with force. But I also see it in dogs who are in some kind of conflict. They're like, Willie will do it when I say get back. If I say get back, he gets back. It was all positive reinforcement to train him to do that. He loves to get back. It's a fun game for him. But I usually have something he really wants, and so he's in conflict. He's like, he knows he has to go away from it to get it, but he wants it, and it's ahead of him. So there are all kinds of attributions we could make to this behavior. Low-level anxiety, being in conflict. Traditionally, it's been used as a sign of high humbleness in social relationships. And it's also been discussed as a calming signal, and that's what I want to focus on for just the next minute, is the whole concept of calming signals became popular from the work of Turid Rugas, who I think is just a brilliant observer, and I credit for lifting up the dog world and focusing them on the importance of really great observation. She's just a phenomenal observer and a describer, and really, really good. I'm uncomfortable, however, with the way calming signals have been used as if they're often being given consciously and with intent, with the intention of calming the receiver. I don't agree with that. I don't think dogs necessarily tongue flick on purpose to try and calm you down. Here's an example of why I say that. You've all seen this, right? This is the infamous tongue flick, right? There's a tongue flick. I would argue that dog was somewhat uncomfortable, and we all know what happens next. I'll just go right off of it so you don't have to see anymore, right? So again, what's the message? What's the meaning? And emotions can make that a little bit more complicated, but they're still important. Another important agonistic signal is what's called the agonistic pucker, and that's a perfect example of what I was arguing earlier, in that I think agonistic puckers can both be just a simple declaration with very little emotion behind it. Go away, just go away. Or they can also include an emotion, and I would argue that emotion might be, at least in some circumstances, anger. I think dogs are capable of being angry. I don't think they are very often, but I think us pretending that dogs, what's that great saying? Who was it? Hobhouse? Who was it who said dogs are what is it? They're the best of humans, but none of our vices, basically. You know, dogs reflect the best of us, but not the worst of us. I think that's a lovely fantasy, but I actually don't think it's fair to dogs. First of all, dogs can't talk, and I think if they did, I think we'd have a very different relationship. I don't think we'd always like what they're saying. I think dogs are way more docile and friendly for a whole variety of reasons, of which many of the great scientists later on this weekend will be talking about. There's a variety of reasons why they tend to be less assertive and possibly even experiencing anger than we are, but it doesn't mean they're not capable of it. And what I am wondering about, so I just put this out there, this is a hypothesis. What I am guessing is that there's an agonistic pucker, but with that there's an expression of anger, and that needs the change in the eyes. You know how a true smile, a Duchenne smile, means the eyes start to wrinkle? You know, there's the, what a nice dress smile, right? There's that, what a nice dress. But then there's a real smile. Hi, I'm so glad to see you. It changes your eyes. It invokes the muscles around your eyes. I'm just wondering if that's another factor with an agonistic pucker. Or could we be seeing one thing or the other, or both things at the same time? One of the questions that one of your speakers has addressed, and I think brilliantly, Dr. Wan did a beautiful study in which she asked the question, okay, all right, how good are we? How good are people at translating, at interpreting a lot of the visual signals that we get from dogs? And what she did, I'm quickly summarizing, is she looked at people with a variety of experience with dogs, from people with little or almost no experience dogs to people with over 20 years experience, PhD behaviorists. So she basically looked at the gamut and she separated them into categories of little experience into high experience. She found videos that had short sections of behavior and then asked people to say what emotion or emotions do you associate with this behavior, and what is the intensity on a 0 to 9 scale of it. So thanks to her, she has given me one of her videotapes and let me show it. I'm going to show it to you. So be thinking about how you would interpret this dog's behavior. A lot of really interesting visual signals, right? Now, one question I have is like, well, how hot is it outside, right? But there's a lot of other stuff going on. The tail's wagging, but the base is clamped. Did you notice I had to watch it a couple of times, but the dog actually is shifting its weight back and forth from its back legs. So here's what she found, is that people who were experts had a relatively high, basically associated fear. One of the emotions they associated with this video was fear and anxiety. Well, let me just talk about fear first. Is this dog fearful? People who had very little experience with dogs, very few of them associated fear with this particular tape. I think if I have the numbers right, 6%, as opposed to 56% of the experts. So it makes a huge difference how much experience you have. And one of the things we know from studies of interpreting expressions on the faces of people from Ekman's work is that all around the world, people are really, really good at reading micro-expressions or really subtle or quick expressions of positive emotions, but not of negative ones. So people are way better at interpreting a smile, for example, than they are a frown or an angry face, basically. That's been my experience with my clients. I don't know how many people who are watching are professional trainers, but I think probably a lot of them. How many times have you been with someone who said, oh, no, you can pet him, he's fine. Right, and meanwhile the dog is just radiating, do not touch me ever, right? So one of the things that we all need to do, this conference can help do, we all need to do, is help the public learn how to observe and describe and understand better, because it could prevent a lot of dogs in shelters and a lot of dog bites. Sometimes the lack of a signal can be a very important agonistic signal as well. We all know the direct eye contact is a very relevant signal in our species and other species, both in cats and dogs. And here's another example.
我没有思考完爱不爱他，反正就分手，我只希望我自己赶快过去。你说我要这样子，好可爱哦，烦死了！
I see nothing. I see nothing.
美丽美颂啊！
So the cat starts
Maybe
moving
look how-
forward. And now we have direct eye contact. Signal has been sent. Signal is not acted upon. Next signal continues. Okay, so I want to end with practice. Some of you have seen this. I think a lot of you haven't. So here's what I want you to do. This is the last video. I'm just about wrapped up. What I want you to do is I want you to decide when Lassie, older dog, who's about 12 there. This is Willie when he was a 12-week-old puppy. Lassie is one playing tug with Willie. I actually would argue, just parenthetically, this is for another scientific discussion, I would argue that she is actively teaching him to play tug for a variety of reasons. She's self-handicapping beautifully, for one thing. But she also decides she doesn't want to play anymore, and she tells him that. And I want you to decide when that happens. So the noise in the background is the television, and I've left the noise on because it will help explain some behavior. So my husband is sitting on the couch. I'm in another room videotaping. So a lot of self-handicapping. She could pull that thing out of his mouth in a microsecond. He's a very strong, healthy dog. She gives it back to him when she does take it out of his mouth. She clearly is trying to play with him, I would argue.
Jim.
That's me. Jim,
Jim.
turn the television down. Jim.
Jim.
Lassie says, what? It's like, no, I'm not talking to you. Not talking to you. So I'm going to play this once, then I'm going to play it again. We're going to pause it on the next round. So I'm going to argue to you the signal one has already happened. He's a puppy, he's a doof, right? So he's trying to, he's still learning, he's being socialized, he's learning relevant social signals. Doesn't all come hardwired, they're not wasps. So she gives the next signal, and this is a perfect example, we'll pause it on the next version, of no change in her eye muscles. But Willie got it, right? I got it. So let's, what's that? Hang on a second. Yeah, I'm going to play it again. And we're going to pause it over what I think are some important signals. And one of them is going stiff and still. And anybody who works with aggressive dogs, if there's any agonistic signal that I think is more important than anything to keep yourself from being bitten, it's understanding when a dog stops moving. Basically, you should hear the alarms go off like a submarine and the captain going, dive, dive, because you are being told something really, really important.
Thanks.
So I don't know why she decides she doesn't want to play, but pretty soon we're going to, keep watching, we're going to pause here. See how she goes little, she puts her head down, she goes still and stiff, and then go ahead and play it again. And he doesn't get it. At least not enough, quite. Yeah, he wants to play some more. He's like, no, I'm done with you now. And so she's going to do an agonistic pucker, and we're going to pause right here. And do you see how there's a full pucker, there's a full display at agonistic pucker, but there's very little change between her eyebrows. So I think that was a classic sort of neutral expression of an agonistic display that didn't necessarily have a lot of emotion attached to it. It could, but I think in this case it didn't. Again, I'm just guessing, right? What do I know? So, what do I know? Not much. That's pretty much the answer. Here's what little I know, as I said earlier. I think we've done a really good job understanding the signals that are relevant, and that's not minor. That's really important. That's a big deal. I don't think we're done. I think there's a lot more out there, but I think we know a lot of them. What we're really working on is what is the message and what is the meaning we should take from that. And that's why You know, that's why I am so excited about Sparks, about supporting research. You know, when I got my PhD, one of my committee members actually said to me after I won a lovely award, a prestigious award, he said, you know, I didn't really think you could do science on dogs. There's been a tremendous prejudice against the study of dogs as domestic animals for decades and decades and decades, and that it's finally going away, and it's just wonderful. And it's why I'm here, because supporting it is so important. It's why I cannot wait to learn from all the brilliant scientists who are about to speak to you next. Thank you.